$7 billion. That was the net worth attached to Charlotte's name when her husband packed his bags. He didn't want her money. He wanted a bloodline. He looked at the most powerful woman in tech and saw only a broken incubator. She spent the next 2 years building an empire out of ice, convinced she was completely unlovable. Then, a tired carpenter with paint on his jeans and 5 chaotic kids dragged her back to the land of the living. David didn't yell when he left. Charlotte often thought yelling would have been easier to endure. Anger implies passion, a fire that still burns, even if it's destructive. But David's departure was clinical. It was an executive decision. "It's not your fault, Charlotte," he had said, standing in the foyer of their 12,000-square-foot minimalist estate. His suitcases, premium leather, bought during their trip to Milan, sat neatly by the door. "But I'm 38. I want to be a father. And after 5 rounds of IVF, 3 miscarriages, and the doctor's final assessment, it's just not going to happen for us. For you. For you." The words hung in the air, heavier than the imported chandelier above them. She didn't cry. Crying was an admission of a solvable problem, and biology had made it brutally clear this was a closed case. Her body, which had ruthlessly conquered the male-dominated logistics industry, could not perform the fundamental task of a mammal. She was barren. She signed the divorce papers a week later. She gave him the summer house in Nantucket and a generous settlement he didn't strictly need but accepted anyway. Then she went back to work. Charlotte Gray was the CEO of Apex Logistics. Her company moved the world's goods. She optimized supply chains, shaving milliseconds off delivery routes and billions off corporate bottom lines. She was exceptionally good at making things arrive exactly where they needed to be. The irony tasted like ash in her mouth every time she passed a playground. The 2 years that followed David's exit were a masterclass in compartmentalization. Charlotte's net worth soared. She bought an even larger penthouse, a glass box suspended in the clouds above the city. It was pristine, white marble, chrome, floor-to-ceiling windows. It was also utterly, devastatingly silent. She woke at 4 a.m. She ran 7 miles on a treadmill that overlooked the sleeping city. She drank black coffee. She destroyed competitors in the boardroom by 9 a.m. She was feared, respected, and entirely hollow. Her assistant, a sharp 20-something named Bridget, managed her life with military precision. "Dinner with the board at 7, Ms. Gray," Bridget would say, "and the PR team wants you at the community center groundbreaking tomorrow at noon." "Send a vice president," Charlotte replied, not looking up from her tablet. "They specifically requested you. It's the firm's new philanthropic wing. The optics require your presence. It's an orphanage and youth center, Charlotte." Charlotte's pen stopped. A youth center, a building full of children, a concentrated dose of everything she had failed at. "Fine," she snapped. "Schedule 30 minutes. Keep the press back." She went home that night to the glass box. She poured a glass of scotch that cost more than most people's cars. She stood by the window, looking at the tiny lights of the cars below, tracing their optimized routes. She placed a hand on her flat, empty stomach. The scotch burned on the way down. The silence roared. The construction site was a swamp of brown mud and bureaucratic delays. Apex Logistics was funding the renovation of a massive derelict community center on the city's rougher south side. The PR team had set up a neat little podium with a red ribbon, safely away from the actual dirt. Charlotte arrived in a sleek black town car. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and heels that had no business being within a mile of a construction site. She stepped out, immediately annoyed by the humidity, the noise, and the sheer inefficiency of the scattered workers. She did the ribbon cutting. She smiled for the cameras, a tight, practiced expression that reached exactly nowhere near her eyes. She delivered the sterile speech Bridget had written about investing in the future. As she stepped off the platform, intending to escape back to the climate-controlled sanctuary of her car, a loud, sharp curse cut through the polite applause. "I don't care what the corporate office says. We pour the concrete today or the foundation freezes tonight." Charlotte turned. A man was arguing with her lead project manager. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in a fine layer of sawdust and frustration. He wore worn denim, heavy boots, and a faded gray t-shirt. He didn't look like a subcontractor. He looked like a man who was entirely out of patience. "Mr. Reed, please," the project manager stammered. "The CEO is here." "I don't care if the Pope is here," Nathaniel Reed snapped. "I have a crew on the clock. I have a schedule, and I have to pick up my kids in an hour. Tell your boss to authorize the cement trucks or I walk." Charlotte walked over. Her heels sank slightly into the soft earth, ruining them instantly. She didn't care. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice dropping the temperature in the immediate vicinity by 10 degrees. Nathaniel turned to her. He didn't blink at her suit, her jewelry, or the aura of absolute authority she carried. He just looked exhausted. There were deep shadows under his eyes, the kind of permanent fatigue that settles into a person's bones. "You gray?" he asked. "I am. Your logistics company is terrible at logistics," he stated flatly. "You rerouted the supply trucks to save 3% on fuel costs, which delayed the cement by 4 hours. We lose the daylight. We lose the poor. We lose the poor. This youth center doesn't open before winter." Charlotte bristled. Nobody spoke to her like that. "I authorized that reroute to streamline the—" "I don't need a boardroom lecture. I need concrete." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, lady, I'm just trying to build the damn thing. Can you sign off on the override or not?" Before Charlotte could deliver a withering reprimand, a tiny projectile barreled into Nathaniel's legs. "Dad! Dad!" Jack pushed me in the mud. A little girl, no older than 5, clung to Nathaniel's jeans. She was a disaster of tangled brown hair and dirt. Behind her, a slightly older boy was trudging over, proudly holding a stick. Nathaniel sighed, a sound that carried the weight of the world. "Chloe, what did I say about playing near the trench? Jack, drop the stick." "The sitter called out," Nathaniel said to Charlotte, unapologetic. "School got out early. It's a Friday. Deal with it." Charlotte froze. The little girl, Chloe, let go of her father's leg and looked up at Charlotte. The child's hands were caked in mud. She took a step toward Charlotte, fascinated by the shiny silver buckle on Charlotte's designer belt. "Pretty," Chloe said, reaching out. Charlotte took a sharp step back, panic flaring in her chest. It wasn't disgust. It was terror. She had no idea how to interact with this tiny, fragile, messy human. Her instinct was to retreat, to build a wall. "Don't touch the ladybug," Nathaniel said, gently pulling his daughter back. He looked at Charlotte, really looked at her, and his annoyance shifted into something else. He saw the panic. He saw the rigid posture, the way she was holding her breath. "You don't like kids much, huh?" he muttered, picking Chloe up. The child immediately wiped a muddy hand across his shoulder. He didn't even flinch. "I don't like unprofessionalism on my job sites," Charlotte deflected, her voice tight. "I'll authorize your concrete, Mr. Reed. Have a good afternoon." She turned and practically fled to her car. As she drove away, her heart was hammering against her ribs. She closed her eyes. But all she could see was the easy, natural way Nathaniel had scooped the child up. The absolute, unthinking love in the gesture. It felt like a physical blow to her stomach. Charlotte couldn't shake the encounter. Over the next week, Nathaniel Reed's name kept appearing on the project updates. He was a master carpenter and the general contractor for the interior framing. She researched him. Not because she was interested, she told herself, but because she needed to know who was managing her investment. Nathaniel Reed, 39. Widowed 3 years ago when his wife's car was struck by a drunk driver, left with 5 children, Leo, 14, Sam, 11, Chloe, 8, Jack, 5, and Mia, 3. He ran a modest contracting business that barely kept the lights on. 5 kids, no mother. 1 exhausted, angry man trying to hold the sky up. Charlotte sat in her pristine office, looking at the file. She thought of David, who had left her because she couldn't give him 1 child. And here was Nathaniel, drowning in them, fighting for every inch. On a Tuesday evening, Charlotte made a decision that defied all her usual logic. The concrete pour had been a success, and she needed to review the interior framing plans. She could have had him come to her office. She should have. Instead, she had Bridget find out where his workshop was. It was located in a converted warehouse on the edge of town. Charlotte arrived at 6:30 p.m. The bay doors were open. The smell of cut pine and varnish drifted into the cool evening air. She walked in. The workshop was a sprawling mess of tools, lumber, and sawdust. In the center of it all, Nathaniel was standing at a drafting table, rubbing his temples. At a battered table in the corner sat 3 of his children. The oldest, Leo, was trying to do algebra while the 5-year-old Jack repeatedly drove a toy truck over his textbook. The baby, Mia, was asleep in a playpen filled with wood shavings and soft blankets. "Hey, quit it!" Leo shoved his brother. "Dad, Leo hit me." "Nobody hit anybody," Nathaniel yelled back, not looking up from his blueprints. "Jack, play in your own zone. Leo, carry the 2. Charlotte cleared her throat. Nathaniel spun around, his hand instinctively dropping to the hammer on his belt before he realized who it was. He stared at her. She was wearing a trench coat over a silk blouse, looking entirely alien in his dust-covered world. "Gray," he said, bewildered. "What are you doing here?" "I came to look at the framing schematics for the East Wing," she said, her voice surprisingly steady given the chaos unfolding around her. "At 6:30 at night? At my shop?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Don't you have a skyscraper to be glaring out of?" "I work late," she said simply. Nathaniel studied her. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. "The schematics are fine. The East Wing is on schedule. You didn't need to drive down here for that." I like to be thorough. Before Nathaniel could call her bluff, the 8-year-old Chloe came bounding out from an office in the back. She stopped dead when she saw Charlotte. "You're the lady with the shiny belt," Chloe announced. Charlotte stiffened. "Hello, Chloe. We're having pizza for dinner. Dad burned the macaroni. You want some?" "Chloe, don't bother Ms. Gray. She's leaving," Nathaniel said, shooting Charlotte an apologetic look. "Sorry, it's the witching hour. Everyone's hungry and I'm behind on these elevations." Charlotte looked at the drafting table. She looked at the kids. She looked at Nathaniel, who was quite literally vibrating with stress. "I've eaten," Charlotte lied. "But I can review these elevations. I have a degree in structural engineering before I went into logistics. I know how to read a blueprint." Nathaniel blinked. "You're kidding." "I don't kid, Mr. Reed." She took off her trench coat, draped it carefully over a relatively clean chair, and walked to the drafting table. "Show me the load-bearing issue you're staring at." For the next hour, a bizarre truce fell over the warehouse. Charlotte and Nathaniel stood shoulder to shoulder over the blueprints. He smelled of sweat, cedar, and cheap coffee. She smelled of Tom Ford and dry-cleaned silk. They argued over load distribution and beam placement. He was stubborn. She was ruthless. They solved the problem in 45 minutes. Meanwhile, the pizza arrived. Nathaniel paid the delivery guy, grabbed a slice, and practically shoved it into his mouth while pointing at the blueprint. "See? If we shift the HVAC route here, we save the vaulted ceiling," he mumbled through the cheese. Charlotte watched him. There was no pretense, no calculated corporate posturing. He was just surviving. "Dad, Mia needs a diaper," Leo called out from the corner. Nathaniel groaned, dropping his pencil. "Be right there." He walked over to the playpen. He didn't complain. He just scooped up the toddler, balancing her on his hip while expertly grabbing a diaper bag. Charlotte watched the interaction. The tightness in her chest returned, an ache so profound it threatened to steal her breath. She realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity why she had come here. It wasn't about the blueprints. It was about the gravity of this place. Her penthouse was a vacuum. It was silent, sterile, and dead. This warehouse, this loud, messy, chaotic family, was vibrating with life. Nathaniel walked back, a fresh-smelling baby on his shoulder. Mia was blinking sleepily, her thumb in her mouth. "Sorry about that," Nathaniel said. He looked at Charlotte and paused. "You okay?" You look like you've seen a ghost. Charlotte swallowed hard. The armor she wore every day felt incredibly heavy right now. I'm fine. It's a lot. You have a lot to manage. Yeah, it's a circus, and I'm the worst ringmaster in the world. He offered a self-deprecating smile. But they're mine. They're mine. Charlotte couldn't stop the words from spilling out. They bypassed her brain entirely. My husband left me because I couldn't have children. The moment the sentence hung in the air, Charlotte wanted the earth to open up and swallow her. She never spoke of it. Not to her board, not to Bridget, not to anyone. And she had just dumped it on a blue-collar contractor she barely knew. Nathaniel froze. The casual, chaotic energy of the room seemed to pause. He looked at her, really looked at her, past the expensive clothes and the icy demeanor. He saw the crack in the foundation. He didn't offer cheap pity. He didn't tell her everything happens for a reason. He shifted Mia on his hip, stepped closer, and looked her dead in the eye. Then your husband was an idiot, Nathaniel said quietly. Because having them is the easy part. It's biology. Staying showing up when everything is on fire. That's what makes you a parent. He held her gaze. For the first time in 2 years, Charlotte didn't feel broken. She just felt human. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Charlotte sat at the head of the polished mahogany table in the Apex Logistics boardroom, listening to her VP of operations drone on about fourth-quarter projections in the Asian markets. Normally, this was her arena. She thrived in the sharp edges of profit margins and optimization strategies. Today, the numbers looked like meaningless static. Ms. Gray? Charlotte blinked. 12 executives were staring at her. The Shenzhen route, the VP repeated, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. Do we approve the carrier switch? The switch saves us a fraction of a cent per ton but risks a 2-day bottleneck at the port of entry, Charlotte said, her voice on autopilot, cold and precise. Reject it. Find a carrier that guarantees the timeline, even if it cuts into the margin. Delay costs more than fuel. The executives nodded furiously, scribbling notes. Charlotte looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Down below, the city was a gray grid. She wondered, entirely unprompted, if Nathaniel Reed had fixed his load-bearing beams. She dismissed the meeting at 11. By noon, she was in the back of her town car, headed south. She told Bridget she needed to visually inspect the community center's progress to satisfy the board's philanthropic committee. It was a lie. Bridget, who knew Charlotte hadn't voluntarily visited a philanthropic site twice in 1 month in her entire career, simply nodded and typed the address into her iPad. When Charlotte arrived at the site, the mud had dried into cracked, dusty earth. The structural framing was going up. The skeletal outline of a building was rising from the dirt, smelling of fresh pine and diesel exhaust. She found Nathaniel near the back of the lot. He wasn't reviewing blueprints today. He was arguing with a teenager. It was Leo, his 14-year-old. The boy was wearing a black hoodie pulled up over a baseball cap, arms crossed defensively over his chest. He was glaring at his father with the specific, concentrated hatred that only a teenager can muster. I didn't steal it, Leo snarled, his voice cracking slightly. It was in your backpack, Leo. Mr. Henderson saw you take the spray paint from the supply shed, Nathaniel said. His voice wasn't angry. It was heavy, exhausted. You can't do this here. You can't be taking things from the site. I was just looking at it. You're suspended for 3 days. I had to drag you out of the house because you can't be trusted alone, and now I have to watch you like a hawk while I'm trying to run a crew. Nathaniel rubbed his face with a calloused hand. Why are you making this so hard? Maybe if you were actually home sometimes, I wouldn't have to be here, Leo shouted. He turned on his heel and stormed off, kicking a discarded piece of drywall, sending a cloud of white dust into the air. Nathaniel watched him go. He didn't chase him. He just dropped his chin to his chest and took a slow, deep breath. Charlotte stepped out from behind a stack of plywood. Teenage rebellion? Nathaniel jumped, his head snapping up. He looked at her, his eyes bloodshot. Jesus, Gray, do you wear a bell? Or do you just materialize out of the shadows? I'm wearing 3-inch heels. If you didn't hear me, you weren't listening. She looked in the direction Leo had vanished. The boy was sitting on a stack of cinder blocks, violently picking at his fingernails. Problem? Nothing you need to worry about, Nathaniel muttered, pulling a tape measure from his belt and staring at a wall stud he had clearly already measured. Just my oldest trying to see how fast he can derail his own life. He stole spray paint. He's angry. He's been angry for 3 years. Nathaniel didn't look at her. Ever since his mom died, he just looks for walls to punch, metaphorically, and sometimes literally. I don't know how to reach him anymore. I'm just the guy who tells him no and makes him eat vegetables. Charlotte watched the contractor. The tough, unyielding man who had yelled at her project manager was gone. In his place was a father drowning in the deep end. Charlotte Gray did not do comfort. She didn't do emotional support, but she understood hostility, and she understood negotiations. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. Before Nathaniel could ask what she meant, Charlotte was walking across the dirt lot toward the cinder blocks. She didn't pick her way carefully through the debris this time. She just walked. Leo didn't look up as she approached. "Go away, Dad. I'm not apologizing to Henderson." "I'm not your dad," Charlotte said. Leo snapped his head up, startled by the cold, feminine voice. He took in her sharp suit, her immaculate hair, and the icy expression on her face. He scowled, trying to recover his tough guy facade. "Who are you?" "I'm Charlotte Gray. I own the company paying for this site." Leo scoffed, looking away. "Great. The boss lady. You gonna fire my dad because I took a stupid can of paint? Your father's job is secure. He's excellent at what he does." Charlotte didn't sit. She stood over him, blocking the sun. "You, on the other hand, are a terrible strategist." Leo frowned, confused. "What?" "You're angry. You want attention. Or maybe you just want to feel something other than whatever it is you're feeling right now." Charlotte's voice was flat, devoid of judgment. She was analyzing a bad business deal. "So you steal a can of spray paint from a guy who obviously saw you do it. You get caught immediately. Now you're sitting in the dirt, grounded, being watched, and achieving absolutely none of your objectives." Leo stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Adults usually asked him why he was acting out. They gave him sad, pitying looks. They asked about his feelings. This woman was critiquing his execution. "I wasn't trying to achieve an objective," he muttered defensively. "Everything is an objective," Charlotte fired back. "You're angry your mother died. That's a fact. It's a terrible, unfair fact. But sabotaging your father's job site isn't going to bring her back. It's just going to make him work longer hours to cover the cost of the things you break, which means he's home less. You are actively engineering the exact outcome you're complaining about." Silence stretched between them. A cement mixer roared in the background. Leo looked down at his sneakers. The hostility in his shoulders deflated, replaced by a sudden, devastating youthfulness. He looked exactly like a 14-year-old boy who missed his mom. "He's always tired," Leo whispered, the anger completely gone. "He looks at me, and I know he's just tired of me. He is exhausted," Charlotte agreed. She didn't soften her voice. She offered him the respect of the unvarnished truth. "He has 5 children and a business that is barely staying afloat. He's holding this entire operation together with duct tape and sheer willpower. He isn't tired of you, Leo. He's just tired." She took a step back. "If you want to rebel, go ahead, but do it smartly. Don't be a cliché. Put the spray paint back. Go apologize to Henderson so your dad doesn't have to, and then grab a broom and sweep the staging area. Or sit here and pout in the dirt. It's your choice." Charlotte turned and walked away. She didn't look back to see if he listened. When she reached Nathaniel, he was watching her, dumbfounded. "What did you say to him?" Nathaniel asked. "I outlined his strategic failures," Charlotte said smoothly, brushing a speck of drywall dust from her sleeve. Nathaniel opened his mouth to reply, but stopped. Over Charlotte's shoulder, he saw Leo stand up. The boy kicked the dirt one last time, pulled his hood down, and began walking toward the supply shed. A few minutes later, he emerged with a push broom and started sweeping the concrete pad in the staging area. Nathaniel let out a breath he looked like he'd been holding for a year. He looked at Charlotte. The exhaustion in his eyes was still there, but it was mixed with a profound, quiet gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. Charlotte felt a strange flutter in her stomach. It wasn't the thrill of closing a deal. It was warmer, heavier. "I expect a clean sight, Mr. Reed," she said, her voice betraying none of the chaos inside her. "Make sure he sweeps the corners." 2 weeks later, the boundaries between Charlotte's sterile empire and Nathaniel's messy reality began to disintegrate completely. It started with a rainstorm. It was a torrential, unseasonal downpour that flooded the city's aging drainage systems. Charlotte was in her glass-box penthouse on a Friday night, watching the rain hammer against the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was drinking scotch and reading a quarterly report, perfectly insulated from the elements. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Gray." "My roof caved in." It was Nathaniel. He didn't say hello. He sounded breathless, bordering on frantic. Charlotte sat up straight, placing her glass on the coffee table. "The community center?" "No, my house." The sound of rushing water and a child crying echoed through the speaker. A tree branch came down on the back half of the house. The ceiling in the girls' room collapsed. Water is everywhere. The power's out. "Are the children hurt?" Charlotte demanded, her corporate calm instantly shifting into crisis management mode. "No, they're safe. We're all in the living room. But the water's rising fast. The fire department is here. They're cutting the power from the pole. They're telling me I can't stay." Nathaniel let out a ragged, desperate sound. "Charlotte, I have 5 kids, a dog, and nowhere to go. Every hotel in a 10-mile radius is booked because of the regional sports tournament this weekend. My sister's out of state." He called her Charlotte, not Gray. "I'm sending cars," Charlotte said. "What?" "I am sending 2 company black cars. Text me your address right now. Pack whatever dry clothes you can find. Do you have formula for the baby?" "She eats solids now, but Charlotte, I can't ask you." "You didn't ask. I offered. Text me the address, Nathaniel." She hung up. She didn't think. If she thought about it, she would realize she was inviting 5 chaotic, dirty, traumatized children and 1 dangerously appealing contractor into her pristine white marble sanctuary. She would realize she had no idea how to host a family. 45 minutes later, the private elevator doors opened directly into her penthouse foyer. It was an invasion. Nathaniel stepped out first, holding a shivering Mia. He was soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. Behind him came Leo, carrying 2 trash bags full of clothes. Sam, the 11-year-old, was holding a leash attached to a wet, terrified golden retriever mix. Chloe and Jack were holding hands, both crying silently, their pajamas clinging to them. They stood in the foyer, dripping rainwater onto the imported Italian marble. The silence of the penthouse was shattered by the dog shaking itself, sending a spray of dirty water across a white silk armchair. Nathaniel closed his eyes. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. The dog. I couldn't leave him in the yard." Charlotte stood in the hallway, wearing black silk loungewear. She looked at the puddle forming on the marble. She looked at the ruined silk chair. She looked at David, her ex-husband, who used to demand guests take their shoes off before stepping on the rugs. Then she looked at Chloe, who was trembling violently. Charlotte walked forward. She walked right through the puddle. "It's just water," Charlotte said. It was the truest thing she had said in years. "The marble is sealed. The chair is replaceable." She pointed down the hallway. "Leo, there are 2 guest suites at the end of that hall. Take the boys and the dog into the second one. There are thick robes in the bathroom. Get everyone out of those wet clothes. Sam, put the dog in the walk-in shower for now so he doesn't freeze." She turned to Nathaniel. "Give me the baby. Go dry off." Nathaniel hesitated. Mia was crying, a miserable, exhausted wail. "She's fussy. She doesn't like strangers." "Hand her to me, Nathaniel." He gently passed the toddler into Charlotte's arms. Mia instantly stiffened, preparing to scream louder at the unfamiliar smell of expensive perfume. Charlotte didn't bounce her. She didn't coo. She held the child firmly against her chest, offering steady, solid pressure, and began to pace the length of the living room with a rhythmic, measured stride. It's unacceptable," Charlotte murmured to the baby, her voice a low, steady hum. "The weather is completely out of line. We will file a formal complaint in the morning." Nathaniel stood dripping in the hallway, watching in stunned silence as the CEO of Apex Logistics negotiated a peace treaty with a wet 3-year-old. Within 2 minutes, Mia's crying turned to hiccups. Within 5, her head rested on Charlotte's shoulder, her eyes heavy. "Bathrooms are stocked with towels," Charlotte whispered over her shoulder to Nathaniel, not stopping her pacing. "Go." An hour later, the penthouse smelled like wet dog and ordered pizza. The kids were bundled in oversized white hotel-style robes, sitting in a circle on Charlotte's Persian rug, eating pepperoni pizza out of boxes. The dog, freshly dried, was asleep by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, occasionally twitching his paws. Charlotte stood in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. Nathaniel walked in. He was wearing a pair of Charlotte's ex-husband's sweatpants she had found in the back of a closet and a plain white t-shirt. He looked clean, tired, and remarkably handsome in the harsh, recessed lighting of the kitchen. "They're settling down," Nathaniel said softly, leaning against the marble island. "Leo actually helped Jack brush his teeth without threatening him." "Trauma bonding," Charlotte said dryly, taking a sip of water. Nathaniel looked around the immaculate kitchen, then out to the living room where his kids were leaving grease stains on her napkins. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know this isn't your world. I know kids make you uncomfortable." Charlotte set her glass down. She looked at her hands. "My husband didn't just leave me, Nathaniel. He looked at me like I was a broken machine, like I had failed the only performance review that mattered." She looked up at him, her defenses finally, truly dropping. "I built this entire life, this penthouse, this company, to prove that I didn't need anyone, that I was untouchable. But the truth is, I've just been holding my breath for 2 years." Nathaniel stepped closer. The air between them suddenly felt very thick, very charged. He reached out, his rough, calloused fingers gently brushing the side of her arm. It was a grounding touch. "You're not broken, Charlotte," he said quietly. "You're just structurally misaligned." Charlotte let out a breathless, surprised laugh. "Are you diagnosing me like a load-bearing wall? I'm a carpenter." He smiled, his thumb lightly tracing the silk of her sleeve. "I know a solid foundation when I see one. You just needed some weight on the beams to see how strong you actually are." He didn't kiss her. He didn't push. He just stood there, offering her a lifeline disguised as a construction metaphor. And as Charlotte looked out at the living room, at the 5 sleeping, messy, beautiful kids on her rug, she took her first real breath in years. Charlotte's biological clock woke her at 4 a.m., precisely as it had for a decade. The penthouse, however, was not silent. It breathed. It shifted. It snored. She lay in the dark, listening. From the guest wing, she heard the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the dog. Someone, probably Jack, was grinding their teeth. Down the hall, a toilet flushed. She didn't put on her running shoes. She put on a silk robe and walked into the kitchen. The aftermath of the pizza dinner had been cleared by Nathaniel the night before, but the kitchen still looked violated. A rogue sock sat on the marble island. A plastic dinosaur was jammed into the espresso machine's drip tray. Charlotte stared at the dinosaur for a long time. She didn't throw it away. She placed it carefully next to the sugar bowl. By 6 a.m., the friction of cohabitation began. It started with Sam. The 11-year-old wandered into the kitchen, his hair sticking up at severe angles. He opened the custom, sub-zero refrigerator, stared at the rows of imported sparkling water and organic greens, and closed it. "We don't have any food," Sam announced to the room. There is a surplus of food, Charlotte replied from the counter, where she was drinking black coffee and reviewing a quarterly report on her iPad. There's no cereal, there's no milk, there's just leaves and bottles that look like perfume. Sam rubbed his eyes. Dad usually makes eggs, but he's on the phone with the insurance guy. Charlotte set her iPad down. She assessed the boy. He was hungry, disoriented, and operating without his usual infrastructure. Sit, Charlotte commanded. Sam sat. Charlotte did not cook. Her meals were prepared by a service or eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants, but she understood chemical reactions and heat distribution. She found a carton of eggs she had bought for a baking phase that lasted exactly one afternoon 3 months ago. She found butter. She found a loaf of artisan sourdough in the freezer. She approached the stove like it was a hostile negotiation. She cracked 6 eggs into a bowl. She whisked them with the vicious efficiency of a woman who despised inefficiency. She toasted the bread. By the time Chloe and Jack stumbled into the kitchen at 6:20 a.m., fighting over a single blue crayon Charlotte was plating. Stop screaming, Charlotte said. It wasn't a motherly plea. It was a boardroom directive. The children froze. They were used to their father's exhausted yelling. They were not used to cold, crystalline authority. But he took my... I don't care, Charlotte cut Chloe off. Screaming wastes energy. Sit down. Eat your protein. She slid plates of perfectly folded, slightly overly browned omelets across the island. The kids climbed onto the expensive leather bar stools. They stared at the eggs. They stared at Charlotte. Then they ate. Nathaniel walked in at 6:45 a.m. He looked completely defeated. He had a notepad in one hand and his phone in the other. He stopped dead in the doorway. His children were sitting in a neat row. They were eating silently. Leo was actually wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. Charlotte was standing at the end of the island, tapping on her iPad, occasionally correcting Jack's posture with a sharp snap of her fingers. What is happening? Nathaniel whispered. Breakfast. Charlotte didn't look up. Your insurance adjuster? They can't get out there until Tuesday. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, stepping into the kitchen. The roof is compromised. The city inspector red-tagged the back half of the house. We can't go back, not for at least a month. He looked at his kids. The weight on his shoulders seemed to physically press him toward the floor. Charlotte, we have to find a motel. I can't impose on you for a month. This is your home. You need quiet. I need you to stop talking, Charlotte said. She swiped a screen on her iPad, sending an email to Bridget. Then she looked at Nathaniel. A motel for 6 people and a dog will cost you $3,000 a week. It will sever the children's proximity to their schools. It will add an hour to your commute to the site. She stated the facts neutrally. This penthouse is 6,000 square feet. The East Wing has a separate HVAC zone and soundproofing, originally designed for a live-in staff I never hired. You will stay there. It is mathematically the only logical solution. Charlotte, they are kids. They break things. Then you will fix them. You are a carpenter. She finally looked at him, her dark eyes entirely serious. Do not let your pride compromise your supply chain, Nathaniel. Your children are your inventory. Keep them secure. It was the least romantic, most clinical invitation Nathaniel had ever received. He looked at her tight, unyielding expression. He saw the terror hiding just behind her eyes, the fear that she was making a massive mistake. He walked over to the island. He picked up a piece of toast from Sam's plate and took a bite. Okay, Nathaniel said quietly. We stay? Charlotte nodded once. Good. Now, who packs the lunches? Because I don't buy peanut butter. By day 7, the penthouse had established a new equilibrium. It wasn't peaceful, but it was functional. Charlotte treated the household like a subsidiary of Apex Logistics. She optimized the shower schedule. She hired a daily cleaner to mitigate the dog hair. She did not hug the children, but she fiercely protected their routines. Then came the collision. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Charlotte was in the Apex Logistics glass elevator, descending to the ground floor lobby to personally greet the CEO of a German shipping conglomerate. It was a massive merger. Months of delicate posturing were about to culminate in a handshake. Her phone vibrated. It was Bridget. "Ms. Gray, the school just called your private line. Jack's emergency contact defaulted to you." Charlotte frowned, watching the floors tick down. "Why?" "Mr. Reed is in the basement of his house with the structural engineer. There is no cell service. Jack bit another child on the playground. They are demanding someone pick him up immediately." Charlotte closed her eyes. The elevator reached the ground floor. Through the glass doors, she saw the German delegation arriving in 3 black SUVs. Millions of dollars were pulling up to the curb. A 5-year-old with a biting problem was sitting in a nurse's office. "Tell the German delegation I have a localized crisis. Send the VP of operations to greet them. Put them in the executive boardroom with the vintage scotch. I will be 30 minutes late." Bridget hesitated. "This is the Mueller deal." "Bridget, do what I said." Charlotte bypassed the lobby doors and walked straight to the underground garage. 20 minutes later, Charlotte strode into the elementary school's main office. She wore a bespoke navy suit that screamed absolute power. The school secretary, a tired woman in a floral cardigan, physically leaned back as Charlotte approached the counter. "I am here for Jack Reed," Charlotte said. "Are you his mother?" the secretary asked nervously. "I am his authorized logistics coordinator," Charlotte replied flatly. "Where is he?" Jack was sitting in a plastic chair, kicking his heels against the metal legs. He looked small, angry, and covered in marker. When he saw Charlotte, his lower lip trembled. He didn't expect her. He expected his father's exhausted sigh. "Get your backpack, Jack," Charlotte said. She didn't lecture him in the car. She simply strapped him into the back seat of the town car and handed him her iPad. "Do not bite my leather seats." She brought him straight to the Apex building. There was no time to take him back to the penthouse. The Mueller deal was waiting. Charlotte walked into the grand lobby of Apex Logistics, holding the hand of a sullen 5-year-old boy. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the security desk. Charlotte ignored them. She marched toward the private elevators. "Well, that is a development I didn't see coming." The voice hit Charlotte like a physical blow to the spine. She stopped. Standing by the security turnstiles, holding a leather briefcase and wearing a smug, practiced smile, was David, her ex-husband. Charlotte's grip on Jack's hand tightened slightly. Jack looked up, sensing the sudden shift in the air pressure. David looked exactly the same, handsome in a sterile way, perfectly groomed. He walked over, his eyes darting from Charlotte to the small boy at her side. He worked for the consulting firm auditing the Mueller merger. She had known he might be in the building, but she hadn't prepared for a face-to-face encounter. "Whose kid is this?" David asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "A PR stunt, or did you finally buy one?" 2 years ago, that comment would have destroyed her. It would have sent her into a spiral of inadequacy and silent tears in a bathroom stall. Today, Charlotte looked at David and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no longing. Just a mild irritation, like stepping in a puddle. "David," Charlotte said, her voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze alcohol. "You are standing in my lobby. You are auditing a deal I orchestrated. You are wearing a suit bought with the settlement money I gave you." David's smile faltered. "This is Jack," Charlotte continued, not breaking eye contact. "He had a bad day at school, and yet he possesses more emotional depth in his left shoe than you do in your entire body." Jack, hearing his name, peeked out from behind Charlotte's leg. He glared at David. "I bite," Jack warned the man. David took a physical step back. "Charlotte, there's no need to be hostile. I was just surprised. You were never exactly maternal." "No," Charlotte agreed, her voice deadly calm. "I am not maternal. I am fiercely protective of my investments. And right now, I am investing my time in a family that actually stays when things get difficult." She looked David up and down, dissecting him. "You wanted a bloodline, David. You wanted an incubator. You didn't want a partner. I built an empire. You build spreadsheets for my competitors. We are not the same." She didn't wait for a response. She turned, keeping Jack's hand firmly in hers, and walked into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off David's stunned face, Charlotte let out a slow breath. Her hands weren't shaking. Her chest didn't ache. Jack tugged on her sleeve. "That man is stupid." Charlotte looked down at the boy. For the first time in 2 years, a genuine, unforced smile broke across her face. It was small, but it was real. "Yes, Jack," Charlotte said softly. "He really is." She led the boy into the executive boardroom, introduced him to the German CEO, gave Jack a notebook and a very expensive pen, and closed a $400 million deal while a 5-year-old drew dinosaurs on the margins of the term sheet. 6 weeks. That was exactly how long it took to rewrite the DNA of Charlotte Gray's existence. The penthouse was fundamentally altered. There were scuff marks on the baseboards from Jack's toy trucks. The pristine white silk armchair, ruined by the wet dog on night 1, was now permanently claimed by that same dog, who shed golden fur with unapologetic consistency. The refrigerator no longer held only imported water. It was stocked with whole milk, string cheese, and leftover casserole in Tupperware. Charlotte hadn't just tolerated the invasion. She had organized it. She optimized the morning routine down to the minute. She negotiated homework disputes like union contracts. She didn't coddle the children, but she became the absolute terrifying force standing between them and the chaos of the world. And then, on a Thursday evening in late October, the architecture of their routine collapsed. Charlotte was sitting at the Marble Island, reviewing a logistics report. The penthouse was unusually quiet. The kids were in the East Wing watching a movie. Nathaniel walked into the kitchen. He wasn't wearing his tool belt. He looked freshly showered, wearing jeans and a dark gray sweater, holding his phone tightly in his right hand. He didn't go to the fridge. He didn't lean against the counter. He stood at the edge of the kitchen, looking at her with an expression that made Charlotte's chest tighten. "The city inspector signed off," Nathaniel said. His voice was quiet, heavy. "The roof is secure. The drywall is cured and painted. The house is done, Charlotte." Charlotte's eyes remained locked on her iPad screen. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She felt the sudden, violent drop of her stomach, identical to the sensation of an elevator cable snapping. "I see," she said, her voice perfectly level. "I will have Bridget coordinate a moving crew for Saturday morning. They can box your belongings and transport them by noon. It will minimize disruption to the children's weekend." Nathaniel stared at her. He watched the icy, impenetrable mask slide right back over her face, exactly where it had been the day they met in the mud at the construction site. "You're going to schedule movers," he repeated, the disbelief bleeding into anger. "It's the most efficient method," Charlotte replied, finally looking up. "You shouldn't have to haul trash bags again." Nathaniel crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides. He reached out and snapped the protective cover of her iPad shut, the magnetic click echoing sharply in the large room. "Stop it," he said. "Stop managing me." Charlotte stiffened. "I am facilitating your transition back to your home, Nathaniel. It is not a logistics problem, Charlotte." His voice cracked, loud enough that the dog in the living room lifted its head. "We're not freight. We're not a shipment you're transferring to a different warehouse." He planted his hands on the Marble Island, leaning over it, forcing her to look him in the eye. "For 6 weeks, you have cooked for my kids. You put Jack in his place when he acts out. You look at Leo like he's actually worth something, not like he's a juvenile delinquent. You held my baby when she was screaming." Nathaniel was breathing hard, his eyes burning into hers. "And now I'm telling you we're leaving, and you're offering to hire a truck." "What do you want me to do?" Charlotte fired back, her own voice rising, the carefully constructed walls finally fracturing. "You have a home. Your house is fixed. The structural crisis is over. My utility here is complete." "Your utility?" Nathaniel let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Is that what you think this is? You think you're just a highly effective contractor I brought in to fix a leak?" "I think," Charlotte said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "that I am not cut out for this. I am a machine, Nathaniel. David was right. I optimize things. I fix problems. Your house was broken. Now it is fixed. You don't need me anymore. Nathaniel looked at her. The anger drained out of his posture, leaving only a profound, aching sadness. He walked around the island. He didn't stop until he was standing inches from her. She tried to step back, but her spine hit the edge of the counter. He reached out and gently gripped her arms. His hands were rough, calloused, and incredibly warm. David was a coward who couldn't handle a woman stronger than he was, Nathaniel said softly, his thumbs tracing the line of her elbows. You are not a machine. You are the most fiercely protective, incredibly stubborn, deeply human woman I have ever met. But you're terrified. Charlotte swallowed hard. Her throat felt like it was filled with glass. I don't know how to ask you to stay, she whispered. It was the hardest sentence she had ever spoken. It cost her more than any merger, any board meeting, any negotiation in her life. Nathaniel closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. You just say the words, Charlotte. You don't need a contract. You don't need a supply chain analysis. You just have to look at me and tell me you want us. Charlotte's hands came up, gripping the front of his sweater. She could feel his heart hammering against her knuckles. The silence of the penthouse pressed in around them, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt entirely full of him. I don't know how to be a mother, she confessed, the raw truth bleeding out. I can't build a family. I don't need you to build a family, Nathaniel said, pulling back just enough to look into her dark, terrified eyes. I already built one. It's loud, it's messy, and it's constantly breaking. I just need you to be in it with me. He kissed her. It wasn't polite. It wasn't cautious. It was the desperate grounding collision of two people who had spent years carrying weights entirely alone. Charlotte kissed him back with a ferocity that surprised them both. She anchored her hands in his hair, pulling him closer, erasing the space between her sterile empire and his chaotic reality. When they finally broke apart, the air in the kitchen felt fundamentally different. Nathaniel rested his hands on her waist. We're moving back to my house on Saturday. Charlotte blinked, the panic immediately returning. But we're moving back to my house, Nathaniel repeated firmly. Because it's where the kids' schools are. It's where the yard is for the dog. But mostly because I will not be a squatter in your penthouse. I will not let you keep us safely contained in your guest wing like a pet project. He stepped back. If you want this, Charlotte, you come to us. You leave the glass box. You come down into the dirt. Saturday afternoon arrived, and the penthouse emptied. Charlotte did not hire movers. Nathaniel and Leo packed the truck themselves. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, the silence in the 6,000-square-foot apartment was deafening. It didn't just feel empty. It felt dead. Charlotte spent Sunday walking the perimeter of her pristine floors. She found a single pink hair tie on the rug. She picked it up. She sat in the ruined white silk chair, holding the cheap piece of elastic, and watched the sun set over the city. By Monday morning, Bridget noticed the shift. Charlotte was ruthless in the boardroom, but there was a dark, hollow exhaustion behind her eyes. Are you unwell, Ms. Gray? Bridget asked as they walked out of a morning briefing. I'm perfectly optimized, Bridget, Charlotte snapped, but she wasn't. For 3 days, she tried to return to the baseline. She ran her 7 miles. She drank her black coffee. She dominated the supply chain, and every night she went back to the glass box, poured a glass of scotch, and listened to the silence ring in her ears. She ran the numbers. The ROI on total independence was 0. The cost of protecting her heart was absolute isolation. On Thursday afternoon, Charlotte stood in her office looking out at the skyline. She thought of David, who had demanded a biological legacy. She thought of Nathaniel, who had demanded absolutely nothing but her presence. She turned on her heel and hit the intercom. Bridget, clear my afternoon. You have the quarterly review with the regional VPs at 2. Cancel it. Reschedule for Monday. I have an acquisition to finalize. Charlotte took the private elevator to the garage. She didn't call her driver. She took the keys to her personal car, a sleek dark gray Aston Martin she rarely drove, and pulled out into the city traffic. She drove south, away from the high-rises, away from the polished marble lobbies. Nathaniel's neighborhood was a grid of modest, mid-century homes with aging trees and cracked sidewalks. She pulled the Aston Martin up to the curb in front of his house. It was a single-story ranch. Half the roof had brand new, dark shingles where the tree had hit. There were 3 bicycles discarded on the front lawn. Charlotte killed the engine. She sat in the car for a long minute, looking at the house. It wasn't a fortress. It was entirely vulnerable to the elements. She opened the door, stepped out in her designer heels, and walked up the concrete path. She didn't knock. She turned the knob. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open. The wall of sound hit her immediately. The TV was blaring a cartoon. The dog was barking in the backyard. Someone upstairs was screaming about a stolen charger. The smell of burning garlic and cheap spaghetti sauce drifted heavily from the back of the house. Charlotte walked into the living room. Chloe was sitting on the floor, surrounded by Legos. The little girl looked up, her eyes widening. "Charlotte!" Chloe yelled, scrambling up and launching herself forward. Charlotte didn't freeze. She dropped to one knee and caught the 8-year-old, wrapping her arms around her. The child smelled like fruit punch and dirt. It was the best thing Charlotte had ever smelled. Nathaniel appeared in the archway of the kitchen. He was holding a wooden spoon, wearing an apron over his t-shirt. A streak of tomato sauce was on his jaw. He froze when he saw her. Charlotte stood up. She looked at the chaotic living room. She looked at the battered couch, the scuffed hardwood floors, and the absolute mess of a life laid bare in front of her. "Your security protocols are abysmal," Charlotte said, her voice remarkably steady. "Anyone could just walk in." Nathaniel slowly lowered the wooden spoon. "I've got nothing worth stealing." "You're terrible at asset valuation," Charlotte countered, walking toward him. Leo came bounding down the hallway, stopping dead when he saw the CEO standing in his living room. He looked at Charlotte, then at his dad. A slow, knowing smirk spread across the teenager's face. He didn't say a word, just turned around and walked back down the hall, yelling, "Sam, set another plate. The boss is here." Charlotte stopped in front of Nathaniel. "I tried the silence," Charlotte said quietly, the corporate armor completely stripped away. "I tried the glass box. It doesn't work anymore. You ruined my baseline." Nathaniel let out a shaky breath. He reached up, wiping his hand on his apron before gently cupping her face. "I told you," he murmured, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You just needed some weight on the beams." "I am not maternal, Nathaniel," she warned him, her voice fiercely honest. "I will likely try to optimize the grocery run, and I will absolutely critique your time management skills." "I can handle a performance review," he smiled, stepping closer, closing the final gap between them. "Are you staying?" Charlotte looked over his shoulder. Jack was currently trying to feed a piece of raw spaghetti to the dog through the screen door. Mia was banging a plastic cup on the floor. It was loud. It was messy. It was a terrifying, uncontrolled environment. Charlotte looked back at Nathaniel, at the man who had looked past her armor and seen the foundation beneath. "Yes," Charlotte said, the word solid and unbreakable. "I'm staying." She didn't need to give birth to a child to become a mother. She just needed to walk into the fire, stand her ground, and refuse to leave. She was Charlotte Gray. She built empires. But standing in this chaotic, sauce-stained kitchen, surrounded by 5 kids and a tired carpenter, she realized she had finally built a home. That's the end of Charlotte and Nathaniel's journey. It's a reminder that life doesn't always care about our carefully laid plans, and sometimes the greatest love stories start where our perceived failures end. True belonging isn't about biological perfection. It's about who chooses to stand with you in the mess. If this story moved you, or if you believe in fiercely unconventional families, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are enough exactly as they are. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more grounded, real stories. See you next time.